Last stream you said you were looking at Memento for the last YCS. Can you give some more details on what you liked about it and what you would focus on for this format? Okay, so Memento was a deck that I looked at because some of my teammates at Raid and Trade have been playing it at regionals these last couple of weeks or before Bologna. And including Ben actually also played it at the YCS. But it was a deck that we considered because it was one of the few decks, or rather, I think it was one of the best decks at doing two things in particular, which was beating half boards when your opponent, like when you have like Fubalos or something, like or you have one board breaker and whatever is left afterwards. Like Memento was really good at beating that, as well as Memento was really good at playing under Fubalos, because I think the Memento combos that we looked at, it was like pretty much the full board. Of course, if you get Fubalos, you don't go for like the Fiendsmith stuff, but like you can do like a full Memento board in like one or two summons under Fubalos, and the end board is very, very hard to break, right? And with the quick play spell cards, you have a lot of ways to outplay a lot of the targeting hand traps like Imperm, Veiler, Mourner. So that was nice. But at the end, I think the reason why we didn't play Memento was that we just simply thought that the hand trap Kashtira Fiendsmith deck was better. Right? That was simply better. For the current format, I guess we can start by talking about that a little bit, just because I can rant a little bit about my preparation for YCS Anaheim, and I think it might be interesting for some of you guys. And I can't reveal too much because I unironically haven't decided for a deck yet. So like there's not much I can tell you. I can just share some thoughts that I'm having about the current or the upcoming TCG format and the and why I'm having a hard time deciding on a deck, because in my head it's like there's two new decks entering the format in Ryziel and Malice, and it's really hard for me to grasp exactly how popular those decks will be. Like I know pretty well how good they are. Like I understand them pretty well. I've tested them relatively like extensively, I would say, so far. So like I have a good understanding of how they work and all that kind of stuff, but I'm not exactly sure how many people will actually play them over the existing decks, right? Like, because you look at the OCG and it's like, well, there's a lot of Ryziel and there's a decent amount of Malice, but they also don't have Snake Eyes or Yubel or even Tenpai at the current power level that we do. So I'm not sure, like, yeah, for the OCG, they're probably the two best decks. For us, I'm pretty sure that they are just like two more options next to the already existing options. And that is something that makes it hard for me to prepare for Anaheim, because Ryziel and Malice being added to the mix is, I think it creates one of those situations where the format doesn't get worse because of this, but the format gets a little bit harder to prepare for, because Ryziel and Malice are two decks that function very, very differently from some of the existing stuff in the format. For example, cards like Infinite Impermanence, Effect Veiler, Ghost Mourner, and in general heavy hand trap approaches like the ones that we played in Bologna, they don't necessarily work as well against Ryziel and Malice. Like Ryziel, I mean, hand traps are okay against Ryziel because Duo Drive is a pretty big choke point. But I would say I would classify Ryziel as a deck that you want to draw like one or maybe two hand traps against. You don't want to draw 3 or 4, because as soon as you draw 3 or 4 hand traps, you basically have to start using your hand traps on their main deck monsters, and that is not very efficient, because the main deck monsters, like, it's so easy to extend. It's like it's literally just like using your hand traps on normal summon Nimble Beaver and special summon Sprite Blue and all that kind of stuff, right? That is a very good like comparison. And so versus Ryziel, because their end board is not super broken, in an ideal world you just draw one hand trap and then either all engine or just like 1 or 2 board breakers even, right? Like against Ryziel, in a perfect world, I draw like 1 Imperm, 1 Talents, and a heavy engine hand, and that's perfect, right? Like that'll beat Ryziel, I think, very often. As long as your engine, of course, it depends on what deck you're playing. As long as your engine plays through their hand traps, okay. Like as long as you're playing a deck that doesn't lose to one hand trap, because Ryziel will obviously be playing a decent amount of hand traps. So, like in a world where Ryziel is super, super popular, I think it's super chill to just play a deck that has like a high ceiling, plays like 9 or 12 hand traps, and like 3 or 6, maybe 9 board breakers or something, like 15 to 18 non-engine slots. You don't need more than that versus Ryziel, as long as you have a strong engine, right? And like the problem with that is that that approach works well against Ryziel, but it doesn't work against other decks super well, right? Like you wouldn't want to queue with that kind of deck into Snake Eyes, because then when you're going second into Snake Eyes, your board breakers are not enough, and you definitely want to draw more than one hand trap. That was the whole idea of why we played 23 at Bologna, right? Is because we didn't want to see 1 or 2, we wanted to see 2 or 3. And like Snake Eyes and Yugioh, I don't think they will go anywhere, because if people are doing exactly that, right? Like if people start preparing too much for Ryziel, then suddenly you will never stop Yugioh going second. You will never stop Snake Eye. I mean, sometimes you'll stop Snake Eye going second, but not as often as you could if you played more hand traps. And then Malice is another deck in the mix that is like also kind of hard to evaluate for me, because Malice is like a deck that's super hard to play against, I found, with hand traps. Like sometimes hand traps are super good, and then sometimes your Imperm or Veil, basically if they draw a normal summon plus a trap or extender, then Imperm, Veiler, Mourner, etc. become very, very weird. Also the deck has Shifter, so sometimes you can't even use your Veiler, or your Ghost Ogre, or your Droll Knockbird, which isn't even good against Malice to begin with, but yeah. So I think that's difficult to prepare for, as well as the Tenpai deck also still existing, right? Like Tenpai is still a deck that is still very good, and I don't think people that played Tenpai before honestly have much reason to switch, because Tenpai is still like, I don't think the Ryziel matchup is like terrible, even though I think Ryziel is favored against Tenpai, but it's like still you're playing against a deck where they have a relatively low ceiling, so like I don't know, a mix of board breakers and hand traps and Tenpai cards I think still does fine into it. You just have to switch what kind of board breakers you're playing, I think, because like Lightning Storm, for example, does not out Detonator, right? So it's rough. For example, the Fiendsmith Kashtira deck, because I will say the Fiendsmith deck is still an option for me for Anaheim. I have thought about just bringing the same deck again, but you run into this exact problem where my deck, like the Fiendsmith deck, has like room for over 20 non-engine. The problem is, I think for this format, it's incredibly hard to distribute your non-engine like between like hand traps and power spells, and maybe just play more engine, because you could play like a bigger Light Fiend package, or you could play more Kashtira cards or something like that, right? And it's like, if I'm queuing into Snake Eye, I still want my deck to be 20 plus hand traps. If I play into Ryziel though, I want to draw like 1 hand trap, and I don't want to draw 3, and it's kind of weird, and that's kind of difficult. And against Malice, Malice is one of those decks where I think you're looking to like rather open fewer high impact hand traps than a lot of low impact hand traps, right? Like against Snake Eyes is the exact opposite, right? Like against Malice, you want to draw Lancia, you want to draw Nibiru, you want to draw maybe even Fuvalos is pretty good. And so like against Snake Eyes, it's the complete opposite. You want to draw Ghost Ogre, Veiler, Mourner, Imperm, that kind of stuff. So it's difficult to play a deck with a lot of non-engine right now, because you don't know exactly, or I don't know exactly what kind of non-engine I would like to have even. Yeah. So that's roughly where I'm at for YCS Anaheim, or that's the problem I'm facing for YCS Anaheim, just to give you guys some insight, I guess. Because I'm not entirely sure how I would solve it. I feel like you can't really get away The thing that doesn't feel great to me right now, but maybe I just have to accept it, is that the more I talk about it, the more I think about it, is that I don't think there is a perfect solution for this many different matchups that all function so fundamentally differently. Like, Ryziel is a completely different deck and dynamic than Malice. That is a completely different dynamic than Tenpai, and Tenpai is a completely different dynamic than Snake Eyes, and so on and so forth. And it's like, you know what? There's like so many different decks right now that have so many different like approaches and answers to them, that I think it's not, maybe it's not possible to find a deck that just does everything, right? Maybe you just have to pick something that you're comfortable with and that does solve like the most of your existing problems, or like whatever you think is the most popular, right? Because like maybe Ryziel will end up not being as popular as you think it is, because in my testing, Ryziel felt good, but not broken. Like it's like I think Ryziel is a deck that for us in the TCG, we're expecting it to be this super dominant force because we're looking at the OCG numbers. My testing so far does not reflect that. My testing with Ryziel so far shows that it's a solid deck that'll be top tier, but by no means does it completely oppress everything else in the format, because like at the end of the day, it's still like the standard Ryziel versions that I'm seeing at the moment is still like a deck with just 12 starters and maybe Pot of Desires. So like the deck breaks a good amount of the time. And even if your opponents are using their hand trap on your first normal summon or your first starter, there are hands where you just pass after that because you don't play that many starters and extenders. And yeah, you can play maybe another, like you can play another engine in it, right? You can play, like I've seen people play the spirit monsters, Aratama and Sakitama. I've seen people play surfacing big jaws or whatever. Like I've seen instant fusion for Mud Dragon, just like level 4 extenders, right? And I feel like when you do that, your deck gets more consistent, but you also lose what makes the deck powerful, which is the amount of non-engine that you have, right? And so that's weird. Do you think 3 talents might be mandatory? I think that's weird as well, right? That's another thing. Like, talents is a good card against Ryziel, really good, right? If Ryziel is the most popular deck for Anaheim, then yes, talents is really strong. The problem with Talents is that Talents was not being played a lot at the moment for very good reason. Talents is not that good against Snake Eye, because if they combo, you're not breaking the board with Talents. The same is true for Yubel. Also, Talents tends to not be a very good card against Tenpai, because they can shift their U and draw phase, and I think they will at YCS Anaheim, because people are expecting more Talents. So I think cards like Fuvalos, Perulia, and Shifter they're just going to use them in draw phase if they have them, right? And so like Talents will not really resolve that often against Tenpai, and you're going to just get OTK'd by Tenpai, and you look at Talents in your hand and you're like, damn, that could have been non-engine, right? Don't you feel like you're overthinking? I mean, maybe. At the same time, this is part of preparing for an event, right? You have to consider all the options in the format. That is very normal and should be done. The only thing is, like, the thing that could be considered overthinking, or the thing that could be considered not very helpful, is expecting to find a solution for every single deck in the format. In a format where there's so many different decks right now, right? Like, that is something that I'm very much aware of, and I'm reaching the point where I'm always looking for the perfect solution. I'm looking for the solution that beats everything. But I'm starting to get the suspicion, or I'm starting to get the feeling that for YCS Anaheim, there simply won't be a deck that just beats everything else in the format, right? I think it's just not possible. So I think the most important thing is going to be making the right prediction on what's going to be more popular, right? Like, because I feel like everyone is giving the impression that Ryziel is going to be like the most played deck by far, and I'm not so sure if that's true. Maybe it could be. I'm not sure. What are your thoughts on people asking for a photo or for you to sign a card at events? I think it's nice. I think sometimes when I'm like sitting with friends or walking somewhere or trying to get something to eat or whatever, like have a just a calm moment. Sometimes it can be a little much, but overall, I mean, everyone just means well, and they're all nice, and so I think it's cool. D-Barrier checks most of this meta. That is the other thing with Ryziel and Malice that I personally don't love, is that because they're on everyone's radar, I'm expecting a lot of people to play cards like D-Barrier and Lancea, not in their main decks, but like in their side decks, right? Like, even though Lancea, in my head, I'm not sure if I want to side deck it because it is just for Malice and I guess Ritual Beast, right? Like you would be covering Malice and Ritual Beast with Lancea. I think a lot of people will do that, right? Like it's not too bad, right? I think I'm expecting like I think Anaheim is expected to be like 11 rounds of Swiss, and probably like 2 Malice in Swiss, maybe some more in Top Cut if you make it, and then there could be a Ritual Beast. So like I think Lancea is an option for sure. At the same time, in a super diverse format, usually you're not looking to play cards for just specific matchups when you have to cover like 6 different matchups or more, right? And D-Barrier is good for D-Barrier. I mean, D-Barrier is already good for like Tenpai, Memento, Branded if you ever expect that still, right? And then you can also put D-Barrier for Ryziel. You can cover Ritual Beast also with Mulch Armies or Nibs. Yeah, I think Ritual Beast is a deck that you shouldn't target with any cards. It's just a nice side effect of Lancea, right? That it also covers Ritual Beast. But I think Lancea, my gut feeling is it might be a little bit too niche for the YCS, but I do understand if someone is scared of Malice, because that deck is scary. Like if it depends on the deck you're playing and the other like how much slots you have in your side deck, but like it's a very good card, of course, right? Thoughts on Labyrinth? Labyrinth is a deck that I've been wanting to look at because I heard, and this is once again I haven't actually tried it much. I heard that Labyrinth is very good into Ryziel. Because for whatever reason, I think the main idea is that you can access D-Barrier relatively easily, and you have like Detonator has to chain to your things. So if they just make their board, you can just set 5 and pass, which I could see that. I could see that being the case. I could see Labyrinth being good against Ryziel, but here is the same problem again, right? Like you can probably make a Labyrinth deck that beats Ryziel. The problem is you're not going to play only Ryziel, and then you suddenly go second and I don't know, your opponent plays Yugioh or Snake Eye or whatever, and basically look at it this way, right? Labyrinth is not a very successful deck at the moment before crossover breakers for good reason, right? Labyrinth is okay at the moment, but it is not super successful, and that is for good reason, because it does not pair super well into the current format. And the thing is, the current format decks, they don't go anywhere, right? Like there might be some people switching off of Snake Eye and Yugioh towards Ryziel and Malice. Like some people will do that, but definitely not everybody, right? Especially for YCS Anaheim, which is 2 days after the release of the set, right? Like there might just be people who don't have access to the cards yet, or who are just not comfortable with the decks yet at this point, right? And so yeah, meta would be so good without Snake Eye and Yugioh. And ironically, I think so too. Like I think the faster we get rid of Snake Eye and Yugioh, the better for the game, because building with those decks in mind is just so weird, right? Like I would love to play a deck that didn't have 20 hand traps in it, but then in the back of my mind, it's always like, but what if I play against Yugioh? But what if I play against Snake Eye? And it's like so difficult to have decks in the format that are like, they're not like rogue decks now, right? You still have to respect them, and like it feels difficult because Ryziel is a deck that like it feels really fun to prepare for Ryziel. Like Ryziel is a deck that's super solvable, even though it is a good deck. There's like so many different ways you could tackle Ryzeal. So many cool like non-engine cards that work against it. You know, like Ultimate Slayers, Book of Eclipse, Talents, all this kind of stuff, right? And all you really need, you don't even need a hand trap, but like ideally you only want to draw one against it just to negate the duo drive, and then you're happy. And everything else can just be strong engine hands or like a power spell. The problem is that you just can't do that because you're still expecting U-Bells and Snake Eyes. And I think in 11 rounds of Swiss in a big tournament, it's very possible that like Ryzeal is the deck you play against the most. Let's say it's 4 Ryzeals in 11 rounds or something, but then there's still like 2 or 3 Snake Eyes and 1 or 2 U-Bells. So Snake Eye and U-Bell together, they might still make up a bigger portion of your tournament run than Ryzeal, right? And so like there's no way you can just respect Ryzeal and nothing else in your deck building. I think that is not smart. I don't know. So yeah, that's how my last couple of days have been going. Yeah.